The curse that sank the Spanish Armada in 1588, the greatest naval fleet Europe had ever seen, set sail to conquer a nation. About 130 ships and nearly 30,000 men formed an armada backed by the Pope and sent by King Philip II of Spain, one of the most powerful rulers on earth. Its mission was to restore the one true faith to Protestant England, overthrow Queen Elizabeth I, and open the channel to Spanish domination. 6 months later, men who had sailed out expecting glory were washing up on the shores of Ireland. Ships were smashed against cliffs. Survivors were hunted, stripped, imprisoned, or killed. Of the roughly 130 ships that left Spain, only about half made it home. For centuries, the story has been told as a miracle. The English struck a medal reading, Flavit Jehovah et dissipati sunt. God blew and they were scattered. They called it the Protestant wind, as if a holy storm had saved England from invasion. But that version hides the real story. The Spanish Armada was not defeated by one miracle, one battle, or one storm. It failed because of cascading disasters, bad planning, broken logistics, corruption, disease, superior English tactics, and finally, brutal weather. To understand the shock of its failure, you have to understand how terrifying the Armada looked. The Spanish called it La Felicissima Armada, the most fortunate fleet. It was a floating city of galleons, armed merchant ships, soldiers, sailors, priests, nobles, and more than 2,400 artillery pieces. On paper, it was overwhelming. The plan sounded simple, but it needed everything to go perfectly. The Armada would sail up the English Channel, protect the crossing from Flanders, link with the Duke of Parma's elite army, and ferry tens of thousands of troops into England. Once that army landed, Spain believed Elizabeth's throne could fall, but the first weakness was already hidden below deck. The curse that truly sank the Armada was not supernatural, it was human. Before a single English cannon fired, the fleet was being eaten alive by rotten supplies. A year earlier, Sir Francis Drake had raided Cadiz and destroyed a huge stock of barrels. The replacements were rushed, often made from green, unseasoned wood. Once filled, they warped and leaked. Water and wine spoiled or drained into the bilge. The food was no better. Corrupt contractors supplied poor provisions. Ship's biscuit was often crawling with weevils and maggots. Sailors sometimes tapped their biscuit to knock out the bugs, then ate in darkness so they would not see what remained. Water turned foul, meat spoiled, disease spread fast. Typhus, dysentery, and scurvy weakened men meant to fight across hundreds of miles of hostile sea. King Philip, ruling from far away and desperate to launch, refused to delay long enough to fix the problem. So the most fortunate fleet sailed as a fleet of floating death traps. Then came the English. The popular myth says tiny English ships simply danced around huge Spanish galleons until Spain collapsed. The truth is more complicated, but English tactics mattered enormously. The decisive moment came near Gravelines, after days of skirmishing. At Calais, the Spanish fleet anchored in formation, waiting to link with Parma. But Parma's army was not ready in the way the plan required. Communications were slow. Coastal waters were dangerous. The invasion timetable was already breaking down. That night, the English sent fire ships into the anchored Armada. These hell burners, packed with pitch and explosives, caused panic. The Spanish captains cut their anchor cables to escape. That decision saved ships from fire, but it shattered the tight defensive formation the Armada needed. The next day, at Gravelines, the English attacked hard. Their ships were better suited to repeated long-range gunnery. Spanish tactics still leaned toward firing, closing, grappling, and boarding, but the English refused to fight Spain's battle. They kept distance and hammered the Spanish ships with cannon fire. Only a few Spanish ships were sunk or captured during the battle itself, which is why some call Gravelines indecisive. Strategically, it was devastating. The Armada failed to link with Parma. Its formation was broken. Its anchors were gone. Its invasion plan was dead. Now Spain faced a nightmare. The Armada could not turn back down the channel. Wind and damage forced it north. The only option was to sail around Scotland and Ireland, then try to return to Spain through the North Atlantic. This is where the Protestant wind enters the legend. And yes, wind destroyed much of the Armada, but not as a clean miracle. It was a natural disaster, striking a fleet already battered, hungry, sick, and disorganized. Ferocious gales scattered the ships. Masts cracked, sails shredded, rudders failed. Vessels that had survived English cannon fire were driven onto the rocks of Western Ireland and Scotland. The Atlantic did what the English fleet alone had not done. It finished the Armada. Of the ships lost in the campaign, far more were wrecked by storms and shipwreck than destroyed in direct battle. That is the key point. England won strategically at sea, but weather inflicted the final massacre. The last myth is one of the most romantic, the legend of the Black Irish. The story claims Spanish survivors washed ashore, settled in Ireland, married locals, and left behind dark hair and Mediterranean features. But the reality was far darker. Many Spaniards who reached land were executed under English orders. Others were robbed, hunted, or killed. Some Irish lords sheltered survivors, and a few men escaped, including the officer Francisco de Cuellar, whose account describes a desperate fight to stay alive. But there was no mass Spanish settlement in Ireland after the Armada. Modern research does not support the idea that Armada survivors created the so-called Black Irish. Those features are better explained by much older connections and migrations around the Atlantic world, long before 1588. So, was the Spanish Armada cursed? In a way, yes, but not by God. It was cursed by hubris. It was cursed by a king who trusted rigid plans from hundreds of miles away. It was cursed by bad barrels, rotten food, disease, poor coordination with Parma, and commanders trapped between outdated tactics and changing naval warfare. The Protestant wind became powerful propaganda because it turned chaos into destiny. It made England's survival look divinely ordained. But the real story is more useful than the myth. The Spanish Armada was a disaster waiting to happen. The storm did not create its failure. It exposed it.